Hi there, and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I'm going to do a shortish video on just this one topic because there's been a lot of talk about this. This is about the prison exchange of Brittney Griner with Victor Bout, and it's caused an awful lot of fracas in America, particularly because it runs largely along political lines and plays massively into the kind of identity politics culture wars narrative that is so prevalent over there. What I'm going to say might annoy the hell out of half of my viewers. Just bear with me and just think, like, just don't entrench yourself in your political positions that you are already in. Just try and have an open mind here. Honestly, just try and be just, I don't know, don't be knee jerk. And I had to do this with this case itself when I was doing my own analysis. I think the best place to start is to listen to an excerpt from Ukraine, the latest podcast. Bear in mind that's from a right-wing news outlet in the UK, the Daily Telegraph. And this is Dom Nichols, who used to be in the armed forces himself. I don't know if that's worth mentioning, but this is his analysis of the Brittney Griner deal that has been done. See what he has to say.
The only other thing I'd say about Brittney Griner is that I think this is an example of sort of pragmatic deal making. US officials were saying it was either accept Griner or nothing. So the case of the US Marine Corps veteran Paul Whelan, who's been in prison since 2018. But President Biden's getting a lot of heat for why are you prioritising sports people over veterans and X, Y, and Z. Yeah, that's for US domestic politics to thrash out. But it sounds very much as if it was this deal or nothing. And when it comes to negotiating, you've got to be prepared to back off your initial position. You've got to have a fallback option that you would be equally delighted to take, and you'd be whooping for joy and high-fiving and all the rest of it to get your sort of second best option. And I think that was what happened here. Whether or not there are lessons here more broadly for how to deal with Russia is interesting, because we know from when we spoke to Yulia Osmolovska months ago now, who advises the Ukrainian negotiating team about how to negotiate, not what should be in those negotiations, but how to negotiate with Russians. She's saying that they always hold a maximalist position. They want everything. They're very, very loud, and it just gets really deafening. So you eventually sort of give in is their tactic. Now, whether or not Russia would see that this is a victory in that guise here, they get a bloke back who's largely he's been out of the equation for 12 years or however long it's been since he was picked up in Thailand, I think. But equally, I mean, they'll have their moment. Great, they'll go on about how fantastic Bout is and so on and so forth. But really, if their whole system, if they're suggesting that their system is going to be immeasurably improved and they're suddenly going to get loads more weapons and all the rest of it because one guy is now available to them, I mean, that's quite extraordinary. So fine, let them have their moment. But I think we should start to look at this and see whether or not there are any lessons there about how to negotiate with Russia. We should get Yulia back on, actually, and talk to her. Maybe try and do that next week. But yeah, just a couple of thoughts there.
Do we think that Bout poses any real threat, specifically to Ukraine? But he's quite a guy with a sordid past. Does he pose a global threat? What should we be worried about him, essentially, is what I'm asking.
And this is a good question. I think personally, I think he has limited utility anymore, and I'll go on to talk about that a little bit later. But this is definitely something worth considering.
Well, I mean, the global arms trade is pretty murky, and those regimes who don't want to adhere to international norms and standards make use of these types of individuals. So yeah, I mean, it's not a great day for humanity if he goes back to his old job. I don't think it will affect Ukraine at all. I think he's much smaller, and the conflicts that he has been influencing and making money out of. He's the guy upon which the movie Lord of War 2005, I think, was based, with Nicolas Cage. So yeah, I think he's made a huge amount of money, but in the global scheme of the international arms market, no, I think he's fairly small beer and will not impact Ukraine. And as I say, if it comes down to one guy, if Russia is saying that they need this bloke to to ramp up their procurement mechanisms and so on, then that says more about their existing systems than it does about this guy.
Yes, thank you for that, Dom.
So I think that's a really fair assessment there. We'll go on to what I have to say now. And I'm going to just read you a comment on my video where I brought up this prisoner exchange. And this person says, I would encourage everyone to react to the dumb political comments. This is my political comments I made on my live yesterday by hitting the dislike button. That's my reaction to the stupidity for the moment. If it persists, I'll simply stop watching. Too bad, because it's clear that a good job is done here to research and put together a good recap typically. But JMSP, myself, when you open your political mouth, it's offensive. And today was simply stupid. Better to not make flippant comments regarding issues that you haven't done the research on. Okay, I mean, I've written an article on this very topic and I've done the research on this very topic. What this speaks to me of is knee-jerk political entrenchment, which is, this guy who usually does frontline analyses that I like of the Ukraine war has veered into making a statement that has some kind of political dimension. And because that political dimension is completely opposite to mine, I want that to be shut down. I can't hear it. And the problem is, if you do that, you inoculate yourself from alternative viewpoints, right? Which means you'll only ever sit in an echo chamber of your own viewpoints, and you will never ever change your mind. You will just become more and more entrenched in that viewpoint, and that produces political polarization in a country as a whole. When we have, I hope that because I know about 50% of you, particularly Americans, are going to be fairly right-wing who watch my stuff on Ukraine. But I hope that I can deliver a political viewpoint that might be very different from your own in a way that makes you go, okay, I'm going to hear you out because, I'm here anyway, rather than wanting to shut me down. Now, if you're the sort of person that is railing about cancel culture all the time, and then you advocate for someone to be disliked and not listened to, that's not really cancel culture. You're not stopping me from saying your stuff. You're voting with your feet, which is absolutely fine. That's a free market and the marketplace of ideas. But it is a form of personal cancelling, such that you're like, I can't listen to that. I don't want to listen to that. And it just means that you are never open to alternative viewpoints on anything. And that's sad in a way. So, for your information, Donald Trump did negotiate for the release of Paul Whelan. This is factually incorrect, by the way. Why I want to do this video is because, call me out, but that's factually incorrect. But Russia wanted the merchant of death for him, and Trump wisely said no. As far as I understand, Trump didn't have anything to do with any of these negotiations. The claim by the White House that they would only release Brittney is a lie. They had their choice, and the politically correct and immoral choice was to trade for Brittney. And I'm going to explain this whole trade. The reason that for that choice was all political, and the fact that Paul Whelan is a conservative was part of that political decision. Again, factually incorrect. How horrible that is. If you would have been wiser it would have been wiser for you to comment on the obvious fact that the US held the trump card. Russia wanted that scumbag, and the US could have insisted on the release of both Americans and gotten them. Okay, I appreciate you watching my videos and commenting, but you need to come at this with some receipts there. When we look, let's just have a look at 2 days ago, The Independent in the UK, which fits broadly in the centre, marginally centre-left in the political landscape in the UK. Trump turned down Paul Whelan and Victor Bout prison swap years ago, John Bolton says. Okay, so this former security advisor, John Bolton, has revealed that Donald Trump turned down a chance to secure Paul Whelan's release 2 years ago, despite the former president claiming to be outraged over the Biden administration deal that freed Brittney Griner, but left the US Marine in Russian custody. Okay, I'm going to refer you back to what Trump said. This is from my own article I wrote on it. And Trump said this. So it's important to know what Trump said, and then we can go back to that. So Trump said, what kind of a deal is it to swap Brittney Griner, a basketball player who openly hates our country? It's a really controversial thing to say, and I've seen a lot of people saying that. And I really dislike it when people say that, because it's not true. You can dislike aspects of your country and protest against aspects of your country, but it doesn't mean you hate your country overall. If I protest against some of my children's activities and say I really don't like that, and I'm going to protest that you've done that to one of my kids, and you don't need to do it that way, you need to do it this way, that's not telling my child that I hate my child. So this is a real problem. So if you're going to protest things like police violence, and you're told in these big BLM protests, you're told, God, I hate it when they protest like this. They shouldn't, this is violent protest. You shouldn't do violent protests. It's like, hang on. Like Colin Kaepernick protested peacefully on his knee and got absolutely eviscerated by Trump himself. And Brittney Griner protested at the Olympics for the flag section before the Olympics, but was representing her country and won Olympic gold, right? If she hated her country, she wouldn't have done that. But she hated aspects of what was going on within her country to the point where she did a peaceful protest. So you can't have a go at people doing violent protests after you've excoriated them for doing peaceful protests. It's like, they're doing the thing you want them to do, and you're having a right go at them for doing that. So they feel they've got no opportunity to get their point across, so they then take to the streets. Well, that's because you absolutely rip them apart for doing silent and peaceful protests. Anyway, that's just a minor point. So for a basketball player who openly hates our country, for the man known as the Merchant of Death, who is one of the biggest arms dealers anywhere in the world, he's not actually, he's been in prison for 10 years, and responsible for tens of thousands of deaths and horrific injuries, Trump mused. Why wasn't former Marine Paul Whelan included in this totally one-sided transaction? He would have been let out for the asking. What a stupid and unpatriotic embarrassment for the USA. Again, Trump is factually incorrect here. Okay, let's go back to this argument. So that gives you a bit of context now. So, Bolton said the possibility for a Bout for Whelan trade existed back then, and it wasn't made for very good reasons having to do with Victor Bout, he said. And we go on here. Russian authorities claim that Mr. Whelan was working as a spy. So this is Paul Whelan, who is a former sort of member of the armed services who was then done for global espionage, and then sentenced to 16 years in prison. While his detention by Russia came during Mr. Trump's presidency, the Republican, who enjoyed a close allegiance with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, ignored the matter entirely. A review of the public database of Mr. Trump's tweets and public remarks by The Independent revealed that he did not utter Mr. Whelan's name even once during the countless public appearances and media availabilities he participated in when his Oval Office workplace was just steps from the White House briefing room. Mr. Trump's then National Security Advisor, Mr. Bolton, eventually took a meeting with Mr. Whelan's sister Elizabeth Whelan approximately 6 months after his arrest on the 16th of June 2019. Mr. Bolton later wrote on Twitter that the meeting had been, quote, productive, and said Russia had, quote, produced no evidence that the former Marine had committed any wrongdoing. The meeting marked the only public action from the Trump administration. Even after Mr. Whelan begged for help from the then president in a June 2019 court appearance, Mr. Trump continued to stay silent and failed to bring the issue up in a face-to-face meeting with Mr. Putin. On Thursday, hopes of Mr. Whelan's imminent release were dashed once more as the US confirmed a prisoner swap had been agreed between Washington and Moscow, exchanging WNBA star Ms. Griner for Bout. Mr. Whelan was originally expected to be part of the negotiations, with the US seeking to swap both him and Ms. Griner for Bout, but Russia rejected the deal. So the idea that they would have had that swap, Whelan for Bout, at the asking is just factually incorrect, because they had asked. They had actually tried to do that deal, but Russia had refused. So you've got to look at worth here, right? In my article, so I write an article, Brittney Griner and the Comparative Worth of Humans. I look at it from a slightly philosophical point of view, as you might expect. And I open just by explaining a little bit here. So what we value and how much we value any given thing is a subjective affair. We might look at price tags on things, but they are for guidance only. If you aren't prepared to pay that much for a widget, you won't buy one. You can try to haggle to arrive at a mutually agreeable exchange with the vendor. Here, everyone benefits. Humans are not widgets. However, it does appear that they have value, and they can be the subject of much bargaining. Over the course of the Ukraine war, there have been many prisoner swaps. Even when these swaps involve handing over the same number of people, there will have been fierce debates between the sides as to what sort of prisoners were handed over. Are both sides getting an equitable deal? So we don't usually talk in terms of deals when it comes to human lives. Well, perhaps we do. In the world of sports, sportsmen and sportswomen, with their perceived levels of skill and thus value, are often exchanged for money. When we work, we are being valued for the output we produce by the organisations that employ us, getting pay deals and packages that are hopefully mutually beneficial. These ideas of value are all the more pressing when they involve people's very lives and certainly their living conditions and freedom. So I go on to say a little bit later, when you buy a widget for $5, the implication is that the widget is worth, to you at any rate, at least as much as what you exchange for it for, the $5. So going back to Russia, when America presented the Whelan for Bout exchange, they did not see Whelan for Bout as a deal that showed value for them, and they said no. There's not a lot you can do. If someone says no, like if I was going to buy a widget for £5 and the vendor says it's not sort of $5, let's say, and the vendor said, it's not $5, it's $10, right? If I don't buy that deal for that widget for $10, the vendor doesn't come and go and have a go at me and like force me, say, well, that's ridiculous. You should be buying that widget for $10. If I don't value it for $10, I'm not going to buy it. It's that simple. So the Russians don't value that deal. They're not going to do that deal. The Americans have to go somewhere. They can't just go, okay, we'll just argue harder. We'll just do a harder deal. If that's the deal and the Russians say no, you can't force them to do that deal. What you have to do is bring in other things to make the value equitable for them. It might be, looking from the American point of view, Whelan for Bout is a good deal, but that doesn't matter for Jack, right? If the Russians don't see them as equitable value, you cannot force someone to change. Well, you can try and persuade them to change their evaluation, but you can't force them psychologically to take on your subjective evaluation just like that. It's this weird scenario. Now, The Hill, which is a pretty central political media organization, says the Trump administration was not prepared for or not interested in wrongful detentions. And this is Paul Whelan's own brother. So again, this completely goes against what this person has said in my comments and what a lot of people in America are saying, like Trump. So David Whelan, the brother of wrongfully detained former US Marine Paul Whelan, said on Saturday that former President Trump was not prepared to or interested in working towards his brother's release. I think the first 2 years, he says, partly I think the Trump administration was not prepared to or not interested in working on wrongful detention cases, said Whelan, referring to his brother's imprisonment beginning 2018. However, Whelan told MSNBC reports that President Biden is making strides in negotiations for prisoner swaps, like the one that occurred between Griner and Bout on Thursday. Quote, the Biden administration is much more engaged in wrongful detentions, he said, adding that the president has, quote, given the government more tools to help wrongful detainee families, but also to try to start to punish the nations who are doing that. Whelan made equally critical remarks about Trump on Friday when he questioned the idea that Trump cares about his brother's situation any more than he did during his presidency. Quote, former President Trump appears to have mentioned my brother Paul Whelan's wrongful detention more in the last 24 hours than he did in the 2 years of his presidency in which Paul was held hostage by Russia, Whelan wrote. So, like, you can sit on whatever political position on the spectrum as you like here. But the simple fact is that Trump didn't appear to do anything to release Paul Whelan. And this is coming from not only, it seems, inside knowledge of the family, but also, from looking at Trump's own interactions. There is no evidence that Trump did anything for Paul Whelan. So it's really unfair and somewhat rich, and I say that sarcastically, for Trump to then come out and say this, right? That's complete opportunism of the very worst kind. Now, the simple situation is that Russia didn't value Bout for Paul Whelan in an equitable sense. There is also other things to take into account here. Bout has served 10 years of a sentence. Is he going to be any use to the Russians as an arms dealer? 10 years out of the loop with those sort of connections being able to be made, so on and so forth. And also, since he's been let out 10 years on, he's going to be completely watched by the international intelligence community. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So there's actually really limited utility of Victor Bout. And I guess it's because people think, I don't know, maybe because he's male and former armed forces and arms trader, you think, oh, he's this kind of like alpha male, really useful bad guy. There's been a film made of him with Nicolas Cage and blah, blah, blah. He's therefore really useful. Actually, when you look at the raw utility of this guy, I don't think, and I don't think America even think that, or sorry, the Biden administration think that he's nearly as useful and valuable as some people are saying he is. Brittney Griner is a human being. Brittney Griner is an international basketball player with a whole career ahead of her. How do you value human beings? And that's what I talk about in here. And I think Biden's just going from a wholly different position of the moral worth of a citizen who you are morally obliged to try and free as being a citizen of your country. And they've obviously failed with Paul Whelan, so they're doing this swap with Griner, and Russia have agreed. Now, Russia are probably laughing at the moment, but only because they understand the divisive power of Brittney Griner. So you got a black lesbian sports player who is pro BLM and thus very divisive in American politics. So you've got half of the political landscape in America going nuts about this deal because actually it just plays into the culture war narrative. Nothing else really. It's like, here's someone that was she just playing basketball normally on a daily basis in America, I would have disliked her anyway, right? And I would be writing things on Twitter against her anyway because she's, this kind of person that I completely don't take kindly to. Therefore, any kind of swap involving her is going to be really difficult to sell to half of the population in America. And what a shame that is, that this just goes along identity politics lines. And then you think Biden's doing this for identity politics reasons. And I personally, I just don't think that's the case. After all, it appears that they first tried to go with the Whelan deal. It's like Brittney Griner was not their number one candidate for swapping originally. The Russians didn't take it, so you have to reevaluate. You can't just keep on asking the same questions. Oh, Paul Whelan, you said no to swapping. Well, it's Tuesday now, and that was Monday. Would you say yes now? But you've got to change things up. You've got to either add more value. That's how you haggle. You either add more value to your side, or you add more value by changing the entire your side of the kind of seesaw, if you like. So we're taking off Paul Whelan. Okay, we're going for Brittney Griner. And Russia have said, yes, we think that's a good deal, partly because we guarantee there's going to be some political ramifications for this. And lo and behold, there were. So I just think there's some really naive evaluations of this swap by certain people. I've got friends of mine who think it's a really bad asymmetrical swap, but I don't think it's understanding the whole thing, really. Great word, well done. Um, so it's. I think there's political opportunism from many on the right, Trump included, and I think a great deal of hypocrisy, given that all the evidence points to the fact that Trump didn't do what this guy claims he did. You know, for your information, Donald Trump did negotiate for the release of Paul Whelan. Receipts, mate, receipts. Like, where's the evidence of that? Where is the actual evidence of that? But Russia wanted the Merchant of Death for him, and Trump wisely said no. Where's the evidence of that? We know that 6 months ago, America did try to do that deal, and Russia said no. There you go. So I don't know. Maybe I'm completely wrong. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. So I write a lot more in my article. Actually, please go and check that out. Brittney Griner and the Comparative Worth of Humans. One thing I will say is I would be very surprised if she did have cannabis oil and trying to take that through customs. She might have done. She might well have done. But this is also a really common way of Russia to get their figures up. We know that, for example, I've talked about that Zambian nuclear physics student who was found dead having been fighting for the Wagner PMC, and he was arrested for drugs possession. And the idea is that he would never have had drugs, but it's just what they do to get their figures up in Moscow and other places. Very commonly, they'll arrest easy targets. Racial minorities are easy there, and imprison them, job done. Numbers are looking good. This will be slightly different because actually here's a kind of famous person going through, or slightly famous person going through customs. Less likely to be about numbers there probably, but I would put a pretty good bet on the fact that Russia would have been absolutely, contriving this scenario whereby if we get her, she'd be a perfect candidate to start some negotiations, and this allows us a bit of purchase in doing some negotiations at some point, and lo and behold is exactly what's happened. Might not be the case. She could well have had hash oil in her sort of vape canisters, but maybe we'll never know. I don't know. Let me know what you think. I'm fairly sure loads of you will lambast me for this opinion. I don't think Victor Bout was nearly as valuable as people are claiming he was, and perhaps these things aren't always about the kind of very mercenary evaluations of utility of different people. Is some other things to take into account as well. As ever, there will have been more. So sorry, what I haven't said is there probably would have been a lot more going on under the radar than we are aware of. So it's almost certainly not just Griner swapped for Bout. There will be other things involved there that we are not aware of, and again, that can skew that calculation, and those things won't be made public. You can be guaranteed on that, at least not for some time. We already know, well, it looks very much like there are other things that were brought into play here, because as ever, there were, as I say, there will have been so much more to this deal than immediately meets the eye, and perhaps we will never really know of the details. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman helped broker the deal, so this happened in the United Arab Emirates, and it's rather a coincidence that this took place a mere 48 hours after the US dropped a lawsuit holding him responsible for the murder of Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi, so on and so forth. So, and of course, it happened after the midterms. Now, it happened after the midterms. Biden would have known that this was going to cause a right ruckus, right? And he chose to have this negotiation take place after the midterms, so it didn't affect the political, actually relative successes of the Democrats in the midterms. Which is to say that he knew that this deal will have been politically bad for the optics. And yet he did it anyway. And the fact that he did it anyway shows you that for him and for the administration, this deal had the necessary value intrinsically, rather than taking into account the value extrinsically and politically out there beyond the deal. He knows that, we're going to be absolutely hauled over the coals by Fox News and Trump and a lot of the Republicans. They're going to have us for this, but we've got enough here to give us value. So I doubt it's just going to be about. I think there would be more to this deal than meets the eye. But even if it is just one person for one person, they will have exhausted all other things, and Victor Bout isn't as valuable as you think he is, because at the end of the day, value is subjective, and Victor Bout is worth whatever Russia are willing to pay for him, nothing more and nothing less. That's it. So when you go and buy something for $50, and you bought this thing for $50, this widget for $50, like, you come home and say, I bought this widget for $50, and I go, you idiot, why have you bought that for $50? That's worth $40. It's completely wrong, because what you're saying there is that there's an objective worth of this thing. It has objective worth, has objective value. There's no such thing as objective value. There's subjective value when we put price tags to try and guide people. But if you're not prepared to pay that price tag, then it's not worth that to you. So if you've come back paying $50 for a widget, then do you know what? That widget is worth $50 to you. I can't argue with that. I think it's worth to me $40. So I'm having a go at you, but I'm having a go at you because we've got different value systems, and I value that at $40 and you value it at $50. And all I'm doing is having a go at you because you have a different valuation to me. That's what's really going on there. So I think it's understanding how value works. And for the Biden administration, the value was there, and for the Russians, the value was there. There was a equilibrium that was met, and a mutual evaluation of that deal, and it was done. That evaluation wasn't worth it. That deal, it wasn't worth it for Whelan, as according to the Russians. So you need to change your deal. See, and Trump should know that. He wrote a book, The Art of the Deal. So, of course, he would argue he would have been able to do that, but A, he never tried. And B, how would he have been able to do that? If the Russians said, no, we're not doing that, how? Do you think the Russians would have had a different evaluation had they known the person they were dealing with was Trump? I don't know. I think Trump has not actually had the greatest of experience with evaluations, and he's I won't get into the long weeds of what he's done with evaluating property and whatnot in terms of tax returns. But there you go. Anyway, this will probably really piss off half of you out there. It's the nature of the beast. But if you're going to disagree with me, bring the receipts, right? Tell me how I'm wrong and how it could have gone some other way. Like how it could have been that you could have got a bout for Whelan swap if the Russians said no. Like, where do you go from there? Anyway, thanks for watching. Good luck in trying to calm down your rage, and I'll catch up with you later.